If a sudden explosion shattered the dawn and threatened everything you held dear, what would you do? Are you curious about what awaits in the echoes of Whispering Gorge? Join me as I uncover this mystery. I'm Jacob Hawthorne, but folks around these parts just call me Jake. I've been a cattle rancher all my life, born and bred on this patch of Texas earth where the sun burns hotter than a branding iron and the wind carries whispers of secrets older than the hills. My ranch, a sprawling spread of dust and dreams, sits on the edge of Comanche territory, a place where the line between peace and bloodshed is as thin as a spider's thread. 6 months ago, I struck a deal with Chief Blackhawk, a man whose eyes hold the weight of 1,000 ancestors. My land became neutral ground, a sanctuary where neither Comanche nor settler could draw blood without breaking a sacred pact. It was a fragile peace, but I'd worked damn hard to keep it. I thought I'd found a way to live right, to carve out a corner of this wild country where folks could breathe easy. But that October morning, as the frost clung to the grass like a dying man's grip, everything I'd built started to crack. Before we ride into this Comanche showdown, give us a like if you're hooked. Drop a wow in the comments and hit subscribe. You're not gonna believe the bombshell at the finish line. The air was crisp, sharp enough to cut, and the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, like God had forgotten to paint it proper. I was out back, splitting firewood, my axe biting into the oak with a rhythm as steady as my heartbeat. The world felt quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over the plains before a storm. My cattle lowed softly in the distance, their breath steaming in the chill. I'd just raised my axe for another swing when it came. 3 sharp cracks like the snap of a whip, echoing from the direction of Whispering Gorge, maybe 3 miles north. Gunshots, not the lazy pop of a hunter's rifle, but something urgent, deliberate, trouble. I froze, axe in hand, my ears straining. 2 more shots followed, then silence, heavy and wrong. My gut twisted. Out here, silence after gunfire means someone's running, or someone's dead. I set the axe down, my hands already clenching into fists. The sound of hoofbeats followed, faint at first, but growing louder, more desperate. It was the kind of rhythm you don't forget. A horse pushed past its limits, hooves pounding like a heart about to give out. I squinted through the morning haze, my eyes tracing the horizon where the gorge cut through the earth like a jagged scar. A figure emerged, hunched low over a paint horse that was lurching more than galloping. Even from a distance, I could see the rider's dark hair whipping behind him, the flash of traditional Comanche clothing, leather and beads catching the light. My heart sank. That wasn't just any rider. That was one of Blackhawk's people, and he was riding like the devil himself was on his tail. As he drew closer, I recognized him. Windrunner, the 19-year-old son of Ironclaw, one of Blackhawk's fiercest warriors. I'd met the boy a handful of times when his people came to trade. He was quiet, respectful, always asking questions about my cattle, my fences, the way I worked the land. His eyes had a spark, a hunger to understand, but now, as he barreled toward my fence line, those eyes were wild with pain and fear. His horse was faltering, its legs trembling, foam flecking its mouth. I could see the dark stains on Windrunner's shirt. Blood, too much blood, seeping from his shoulder and thigh. Bullet wounds. My stomach dropped like a stone. This wasn't just trouble. This was a death chase, and it was about to land square in my yard. The horse made it to the edge of my property before it gave out, collapsing to its knees with a pitiful whinny, rolling onto its side in a cloud of dust. Windrunner tumbled from the saddle, hitting the ground hard. He tried to stand, his legs shaking like a newborn calf's, but they buckled under him. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the earth red. I ran toward him, my boots kicking up dirt, my mind racing. "Windrunner," I called, dropping to my knees beside him. His hand shot to the knife at his belt, his eyes wide, unseeing for a moment, like a cornered animal. He spoke fast, his voice hoarse, words spilling out in Comanche, words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. Pain, fear, desperation. "Easy, son," I said, raising my hands, palms out to show I meant no harm. "It's me, Jake. I'm gonna help you." His eyes flickered, recognition cutting through the haze of agony. He tried to speak again, this time in broken English, his voice barely a whisper. "Soldiers, they come. You cannot help. Sacred law." His words trailed off as his head lolled to the side, blood loss pulling him under. I cursed under my breath, my hands hovering over his wounds. The blood was still warm, seeping through the torn leather of his shirt. A bullet had torn through his shoulder, another through his thigh. He was fading fast, and I didn't need to be a doctor to know he wouldn't last long without help. But then I heard it, the sound of more horses, coming fast. Too fast. The ground hummed with the thunder of hooves, maybe a dozen riders, their voices sharp with military precision. Cavalry. I could hear the jingle of spurs, the barked orders, the clatter of rifles. They were close. 5 minutes, maybe less. My mind spun. My ranch was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where no blood could be spilled, not by Comanche, not by settlers, not by anyone. That was the deal I'd made with Black Hawk, sealed with his word and mine. But this was something else. Windrunner wasn't just a fugitive. He was Iron Claw's son, and if the cavalry found him here, bleeding out in my yard, there'd be no explaining it. They'd see a Comanche warrior, a killer maybe, and they'd shoot first, ask questions later. But if I hid him, if I helped him, I'd be breaking the trust of the settlers, maybe even the law. And worse, Windrunner's words echoed in my head, something about a sacred law, something that could cost me my life. I looked down at the boy, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, his face pale as the frost on the grass. 19 years old, just a kid, caught in something bigger than him. I thought of Black Hawk's daughter, Little Star, 6 months ago, starving, half dead when I found her, and how I'd carried her back to her people, how that one act had built this fragile peace. I'd made a choice then, to do what was right, no matter the cost. And now, staring at Windrunner's blood-soaked body, I knew I was facing that same choice again. My hands shook as I scooped him up, his weight heavy in my arms, his blood soaking through my shirt. Behind me, the hoofbeats grew louder, the cavalry closing in like a storm. I ran for the cabin, my heart pounding, knowing I was about to make a decision that could save a life, or burn everything I'd built to the ground. The door slammed shut behind me as I laid Windrunner on my bed, his breathing ragged but steady. I grabbed a clean cloth, pressing it to his wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. My hands were slick with blood, his blood, my responsibility. Outside, the cavalry was almost here. I could hear their horses slowing, the creak of saddles, the low murmur of voices. They'd be at my door in minutes, maybe seconds. I looked at Windrunner, his face twisted in pain, and I thought of Iron Claw, his father, a man who'd kill without hesitation to protect his own. I thought of the sacred law he'd mentioned, the one that might demand my blood for helping him. And I thought of the cavalry, men I'd known my whole life, men who'd see me as a traitor if they found a Comanche hiding in my home. I wiped the blood from my hands, my mind racing for a way out. There wasn't one, not a clean one anyway. If I turned Windrunner over, I'd be betraying the Comanche, breaking the trust I'd spent months building. If I hid him, I'd be defying the cavalry, maybe the whole damn government. And if I did nothing, the boy would die, and the truth, whatever it was, would die with him. The hoofbeats stopped. A sharp knock rattled my door, followed by a voice that cut through the morning like a blade. "Open up, Hawthorne! This is Captain Victor Crane, United States Cavalry!" My blood went cold. I glanced at Windrunner, then at the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. The peace I'd fought for was about to shatter, and I was standing right in the middle of the wreckage. But hold on, folks, the tension's just heating up, and you won't believe what Jake faces next, so keep watching for a twist that'll leave you speechless. The air inside my cabin was thick with the coppery smell of blood, and Windrunner's shallow breaths were the only sound louder than the pounding of my heart. I'd barely gotten him settled on my bed, his wounds packed with torn strips of my best shirt, when the knock came again, harder this time, like the fist of fate itself. "Hawthorne, open this door or we'll break it down!" Captain Victor Crane's voice was sharp, commanding, the kind of tone that expected obedience. I wiped my hands on my jeans, smearing Windrunner's blood across the denim, and took a deep breath. My mind was a whirlwind, spinning with choices that all led to ruin. Hide the boy, and I'd be a traitor to my own people. Turn him over, and I'd betray the Comanche, shattering the fragile peace I'd sworn to uphold. Do nothing, and he'd die, his blood on my hands in more ways than one. I glanced at Windrunner. His eyes were half open, glazed with pain, but he was still with me, clinging to life like a man drowning. "Don't help," he whispered again, his voice barely audible. "Sacred law." I didn't know what he meant, not exactly, but the fear in his eyes told me it was real. Some Comanche code that could cost me everything. Outside, I heard the creak of boots on my porch, the low murmur of soldiers spreading out, their rifles clinking as they took positions around my cabin. They were circling like wolves, and I was the prey caught in the open. I moved fast, pulling a blanket over Windrunner, tucking it around him to hide the bloodstains. His wounds were still seeping, the cloth I'd used already soaked through, but there was no time to do more. I grabbed a clean shirt from my dresser, pulling it on to cover the blood on my chest, and ran a hand through my hair, trying to look like a man who hadn't just dragged a fugitive into his home. My hands were still shaking, though, and my mind kept circling back to that sacred law. What did it mean? Why was Windrunner so desperate to keep me out of this? But there was no time to think, no time to weigh the consequences. The cavalry was here, and I had to face them. I opened the door just as Crane raised his fist to knock again. He was tall, lean, with a face carved from stone and eyes like chips of ice. His blue uniform was crisp, his lieutenant's bars gleaming in the morning light. But there was something about him that set my teeth on edge, a coldness, a hunger for control that went beyond duty. Behind him, 10 soldiers fanned out across my yard, their rifles held low but ready. I recognized a few faces, men from town, men I'd shared drinks with at the saloon. But they looked different now, harder, like strangers wearing familiar skin. "Morning, Captain," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my insides were churning. "What brings you to my ranch?" Crane's eyes flicked over me, taking in every detail. The sweat on my brow, the way my arms were crossed to hide the blood on my jeans. "We're pursuing a Comanche renegade," he said, his voice smooth as a snake's hiss. "Killed 2 of my men this morning, stole from a supply wagon meant for the reservation. Witnesses saw him ride this way. You wouldn't happen to have seen anything unusual, would you, Hawthorne?" My mouth went dry. I could hear Windrunner's labored breathing from the bedroom, faint but unmistakable, and I prayed Crane couldn't hear it too. "Heard some gunshots earlier," I said carefully. "Maybe an hour ago, up near Whispering Gorge. Didn't see nothing, though." Crane stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Mind if we take a look around?" he asked, but it wasn't a question. His hand rested on his sidearm, a clear warning. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to stand my ground, but if I refused, they'd know I was hiding something. And if they found Windrunner, he'd be dead before the sun hit noon. "This ranch is neutral ground," I said, meeting his gaze. "You know that, Captain. Chief Blackhawk and I have an agreement. No fighting, no bloodshed here. I'd hate for your colonel to hear you broke that pact." Crane's eyes narrowed, but before he could reply, one of his men called out from the yard. "Captain! Horse tracks leading right to the fence." My heart sank. Windrunner's paint horse was still lying there, exhausted, its sides heaving. There was no hiding that trail, no explaining it away. Crane's smile was cold, predatory. "Neutral ground or not, Hawthorne, those tracks tell a story, and I'm betting it's one you don't want us to read." He gestured to his men. "Spread out, check the barn, the shed, every inch of this place. Our man's wounded, bleeding bad. He can't have gone far." The soldiers moved like a machine, fanning out with practiced efficiency. I stood there, my mind racing, knowing they'd find the blood in my bedroom, the boy I'd hidden. I had minutes, maybe less, before this all went to hell. That's when I saw it, slung over one of the soldiers' shoulders, a leather pouch, Comanche-made, with intricate beadwork that gleamed in the sunlight. I'd seen pouches like that before, traded by Blackhawk's people, but this one was different. The patterns were wrong, the colors off, not the work of anyone from Blackhawk's tribe. And there were dark stains on it, stains that looked too much like dried blood. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right about Crane's story, about this whole damn situation. "Captain," I said, stepping forward, my voice low but firm. "That pouch, where'd you get it?" Crane's eyes flicked to the pouch, then back to me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his gaze. Guilt maybe, or fear. "Belonged to one of my men," he said too quickly. "The Comanche took it as a trophy after he killed him." I stared at the pouch, my mind working fast. I'd spent enough time with Blackhawk's people to know their craftsmanship, their pride in every stitch and bead. This wasn't theirs. It was a lie, or worse, a setup. Before I could push further, a crash came from inside my cabin. One of the soldiers had knocked over a chair in my kitchen, and now he was shouting, "Captain, blood in here! Fresh blood! Still wet!" My heart stopped. They'd found the trail. Windrunner's shirt, the one I'd cut away to bandage him, lying in a heap on the floor. Crane turned to me, his smile colder than a winter grave. "Well, well, Hawthorne. Seems your neutrality ain't as neutral as you claim." I was trapped. The soldiers were closing in, their rifles now pointed at me, and I could hear the faint thud of hooves in the distance. Comanche war drums, low and steady, like the pulse of the earth itself. Iron Claw was coming, and he was coming for blood. I had to make a choice right then and there, and every option felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Save Windrunner and I'd be a dead man. Turn him over and I'd lose everything I'd built with the Comanche. I looked at the pouch again, that damned lie hanging from a soldier's shoulder, and I knew one thing for certain. Whatever Crane was hiding, it was bigger than one wounded boy, and I was about to step into the middle of it. The war drums were louder now, a deep, relentless rhythm that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. I stood in the doorway of my cabin, caught between Crane's soldiers and the approaching Comanche war party, my heart pounding so hard I thought it had burst. The soldiers had found Windrunner's blood-soaked shirt, and Crane's eyes were locked on me, his hand twitching toward his sidearm. "You've got some explaining to do, Hawthorne," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "Harboring a fugitive's a hanging offense." I wanted to spit in his face, to call out his lies, but I held my tongue. The pouch I'd seen, the one with the wrong beadwork, was still nagging at me. It didn't add up. Not the pouch, not Crane's story about Windrunner killing his men, not the way his soldiers kept glancing at each other, like they were waiting for something to break. But there was no time to unravel it. The drums were getting closer, and I could hear the war cries now, sharp and fierce, carried on the wind. Iron Claw's war party was almost here, and if they found their chief's son bleeding out in my cabin, accused of murder, there'd be no talking them down. "Captain," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you're on neutral ground. You start a fight here, you'll answer to your colonel and to Black Hawk." Crane's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, one of his men, Hank Reed, a young sergeant I'd known since he was a kid, stepped forward, his face pale. "Captain, maybe we should send word to Colonel Grayson. This ain't right." Crane spun on him, his eyes blazing. "You questioning my orders, Sergeant?" Reed didn't back down, though I could see the fear in his eyes. "I'm saying Mr. Hawthorne's got a point. This ranch is neutral. If we violate that without proof—" "Proof?" Crane snapped, holding up Windrunner's bloody shirt. "This is proof. Fresh blood right here in his cabin." I felt my stomach lurch. They were inches from finding Windrunner, hidden under the blankets in my bedroom. I had to do something, say something before this spiraled into a massacre. But then the drums stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than any sound. I looked toward the horizon and saw them. 30 Comanche warriors, their horses snorting and stamping, led by Iron Claw himself. His face was streaked with black war paint, his eyes burning with a father's rage. They halted 50 yards from my cabin, their weapons glinting in the sun. I stepped forward, placing myself between the soldiers and the war party, my hands raised high. "Iron Claw!" I shouted, praying he'd hear me, praying he'd listen. "Your son is alive. He's in my cabin, wounded but breathing." The effect was instant. Iron Claw's expression shifted from fury to something else, hope, maybe, or disbelief. He dismounted, his tomahawk still in hand, and walked toward me, each step deliberate, like a man carrying the weight of his people. Behind me, Crane hissed, "You fool, Hawthorne. You just signed our death warrants." I ignored him, focusing on Iron Claw. "He rode here, bleeding bad," I said. "I couldn't let him die." Iron Claw's eyes searched mine, looking for a lie, but he found none. He spoke, his English rough but clear. "Soldiers say my son killed their brothers, stole from children." His voice was like thunder, low and dangerous. I shook my head. "They're lying." The words hung in the air, heavy as gunpowder. Crane cursed, and I heard the click of rifles being raised behind me. From the Comanche side came angry murmurs as Iron Claw translated my words. "That's enough!" Crane shouted, stepping forward, his rifle aimed at my back. "I won't stand here and let a savage sympathizer." But before he could finish, a voice cut through the chaos, weak but sharp, from the doorway of my cabin. "The soldiers lie." It was Windrunner, leaning against the frame, his bandages stained red, his face pale as death. He spoke in Comanche, rapid and urgent, gesturing toward the hills where Whispering Gorge lay. Ironclaw's face darkened with every word, his hand tightening on his tomahawk. "He says," Ironclaw translated, his voice deadly quiet, "the soldiers marked our sacred trees, tried to steal our burial grounds. They shot him when he fought to protect our ancestors." The truth hit me like a bullet. Windrunner wasn't a murderer. He was a warrior defending his people's holy land. I turned to Crane, my voice shaking with anger. "Is that true, Captain? Were you out there marking Comanche land for some government scheme?" Crane's silence was damning, his face pale as the truth unraveled. Reed stepped forward again, his voice steady despite the tension. "It's true, Mr. Hawthorne. We weren't escorting a supply wagon. We were guarding a surveyor, mapping out the sacred hills. They think there's silver there. Windrunner caught us, tried to stop us, and the surveyor shot first." The yard went still, the soldiers shifting uneasily, their rifles lowering slightly. Ironclaw's warriors murmured, their anger growing, but it was Reed's next words that broke the dam. "Captain Crane's been taking bribes from land speculators. He's been selling out the Comanche for months." The revelation was like a spark in a powder keg. Ironclaw raised his tomahawk, letting out a war cry that sent a chill down my spine. His warriors echoed it, their weapons ready. Crane's men raised their rifles, and I stood there, caught in the middle, knowing that one wrong move would turn my ranch into a battlefield. I had to act, had to find a way to stop this before blood soaked the earth. "Ironclaw!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the war cries. "Your son's alive because I broke your sacred law. If you spill blood here, you break it too. This is neutral ground." Ironclaw froze, his tomahawk still raised, his eyes locked on mine. I could see the war in his heart, rage against duty, a father's love against a warrior's honor. Windrunner spoke again, his voice weak but clear, and Ironclaw's expression softened, just a fraction. "My son says you saved him," he said. "He says you are a true warrior." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I just did what was right," I said. "But Crane's story doesn't add up. That pouch, the one he claims is a trophy, it's not from your people. It's a lie." Ironclaw's gaze flicked to the pouch, still slung over a soldier's shoulder. He stepped forward, snatching it from the man's hands, and examined it closely. "This is not ours," he said, his voice cold. "This is a white man's trick." Crane's face went white, and I knew we were seconds from disaster. The truth was out, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The air was thick with the promise of violence, the kind that lingers before a storm breaks. Ironclaw held the pouch, his fingers tracing the false beadwork, his eyes burning with the realization that he'd been played. Behind me, Crane's soldiers were tense, their rifles half raised, their faces a mix of fear and shame. Reed's confession had cracked their loyalty, but Crane still stood defiant, his hand on his sidearm, his jaw set like a man who'd rather die than admit defeat. And out there, beyond my fence, 30 Comanche warriors waited, their war cries silenced, but their weapons ready. I stood in the middle, my heart pounding, knowing that one wrong word could turn my ranch into a slaughterhouse. "Captain Crane," I said, my voice low but firm, "you've got one chance to tell the truth. What really happened out there in the gorge?" Crane's eyes darted to his men, then to Ironclaw, and for the first time, I saw fear in his gaze. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Windrunner staggered forward, clutching the doorframe for support. "Father," he said in English, his voice weak but clear, "this man, Jake, he saved me. He broke your law to keep me alive." Ironclaw's gaze softened as he looked at his son, but the fury was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. Windrunner continued, his words halting but deliberate. "The soldiers, they marked our sacred trees for silver. They shot me when I tried to stop them. Jake, he chose my life over his own." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't thought of it that way, not as some grand sacrifice, but as the only thing I could do. But now, with Ironclaw's eyes on me, I felt the weight of it, the sacred law Windrunner had warned me about. Whatever it was, It meant Ironclaw might have to kill me for helping his son, even if I'd saved him. Ironclaw spoke, his voice heavy with authority. The law says any white man who aids a Comanche facing justice must face the same fate. He paused, his eyes searching mine. But my son says you saved him from a white man's lie. That changes things. Before I could respond, Crane made his move. His hand flashed to his sidearm, aiming at Windrunner, his face twisted with desperation. "He's a liar," Crane shouted. He didn't finish. Reed tackled him, sending them both crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust. "Enough, Captain," Reed growled, pinning Crane's arms. "You're under arrest. For treason, for conspiracy, for everything you've done." The other soldiers hesitated, their rifles wavering, but none moved to help Crane. Reed's betrayal had broken them, and I could see the truth sinking in. They'd been following a corrupt man, a man who'd sold out everyone for a handful of silver. Ironclaw watched, his tomahawk still in hand, but he didn't move. "Not all white men lack honor," he said, his voice calm but heavy. He turned to me. "My son proposes a choice for the guilty, trial by combat, as our laws demand, or a white man's trial, with Comanche witnesses to ensure justice." I blinked, stunned by the compromise. It was brilliant, a way to satisfy the Comanche's need for justice without sparking a war, but Crane wasn't done. He broke free from Reed, lunging for his rifle, his eyes wild with panic. Before I could react, Ironclaw's tomahawk spun through the air, striking Crane in the shoulder. He screamed, collapsing in the dirt, blood pooling beneath him. "Now he faces our trial," Ironclaw said, retrieving his weapon, his voice as cold as the steel in his hand. The soldiers froze, their eyes on their fallen captain, but none dared move. I looked at Windrunner, still clinging to the door frame, and saw the strength in him, the fire that had kept him alive through blood and betrayal. "Ironclaw," I said, stepping forward, "if you let me, I'll take this to the governor. I'll make sure the truth comes out, not just about Crane, but about the whole damn scheme." Ironclaw studied me, his eyes unreadable. "You would speak for us? A white man?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I'll speak for what's right." He nodded slowly, a gesture of respect I hadn't expected. "Then we will wait," he said. "But know this, Jake Hawthorne, if you fail, there will be war." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud, but I knew I had no choice. I had to see this through, for Windrunner, for Ironclaw, for the peace I'd sworn to protect. The trial by combat was over in minutes. Crane, wounded and desperate, stood no chance against Ironclaw's chosen warrior, a young Comanche named Swiftblade. The fight was brutal, quick, and final, leaving Crane's body in the dust of my yard. But as the war party dispersed, taking Windrunner to safety, I knew the real battle was just beginning. The pouch, the one with the false beadwork, held more than just lies. It held proof. Surveyor's markers, etched with government codes, spilled out when Ironclaw opened it. Each one was a betrayal, a violation of the treaties that protected Comanche land, and I was the one who had to carry that proof to the territorial capital, to stand before men who'd rather see me dead than hear the truth. I rode to Austin 3 weeks later, the pouch heavy in my saddlebag, my heart heavier still. The journey was long, the trail dusty and unforgiving, but I couldn't shake the image of Windrunner's face, pale but defiant, or Ironclaw's eyes, trusting me to do what no white man had done before, speak for the Comanche. The governor's office was a world away from my ranch, all polished wood and stern faces, but I stood tall, the markers spread out on his desk like evidence of a crime. I told him everything. Crane's bribes, the surveyor's schemes, the silver they thought was hidden in the sacred hills. I told him about Windrunner, a boy who'd fought for his people and nearly died for it. And I told him about the war that would come if justice wasn't served. The governor listened, his face unreadable, but I could see the wheels turning. He knew the stakes, knew that ignoring this would mean blood, not just from the Comanche, but from every tribe in Texas. When I finished, he leaned back, his fingers steepled, and said, "You've brought me a hell of a problem, Hawthorne." I didn't flinch. "It's your problem now, Governor, but it's been the Comanche's problem a lot longer." What followed was a storm of its own. Investigations tore through the government like wildfire, rooting out 17 officials tied to the land grab. The surveyor's operation was shut down, the markers destroyed, and new treaties were signed. treaties that, for once, held the line on Comanche land. Windrunner recovered, his wounds healing as he stepped into a new role, a bridge between his people and the settlers, his voice carrying the weight of his father's trust. Ironclaw lived to see his grandchildren grow up on land that remained free, and my ranch stayed neutral ground, a place where peace wasn't just a word, but a promise kept. Every year, on that October morning when it all went down, I'd find a single eagle feather on my doorstep, its quill sharp and proud. It was Ironclaw's way of saying what words couldn't, that we'd done something together, something bigger than either of us. My ranch became more than a sanctuary. It became a symbol, a place where two peoples learned that justice and mercy could walk hand in hand. And as I stood on my porch, watching the sun rise over the plains, I knew the truth. Sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought with guns or knives, but with the courage to stand up and speak when the world wants you to stay silent.